guys, what's up? It's Scoundrel here, and today we're going to talk about something that I know a lot of you have been requesting, and it is the draft phase, and how to approach draft phase, what you should think about banning, and what you should think about picking. Now, the only terminology that you need to know during this simulation is A-side and B-side. And there's so many things that could happen in draft. I know a lot of you will be wondering, what should I ban right now? What should I pick right now? Well, that's something that is different to this video. That would be a meta discussion. What I'm going to teach you is how to approach draft through every stage of the meta. It does require you to try and understand the meta and learn the meta, but it is something that you'll get to grips with. I want to teach you the very basics on how to draft though, because this will be something that you can use throughout your Vainglory careers, not just right now. So let's talk about A-side ban, which is the ban when you are on the left side, it is your first ban. First reason you do a ban on A-side is that you don't want to play against something or something is strong in meta. For instance, I really don't like playing against Baron, so I ban Baron a lot of the times on A-side. And that double whammies because I also don't like laning with Baron, and that's also something that you should consider. You should ban something on A-side that you aren't comfortable first picking if left open. If no one on your team plays Baron, for instance, and he's obviously quite strong on update 2.6, then you should ban Baron, because if B-side don't, and you don't first pick it, you give a strong pick over to them. So you should consider the first two options very carefully. Something that you don't want to play against that is strong on meta, but also if you're not comfortable first picking one of those strong picks, you should consider banning it on A-side, because if the B-side leave it open, then you're left in a tough situation where you have to pick it or you give it to them, and that's tough. You could also ban something that counters a specific hero or composition. So for instance, let's say you're I don't know, Cruel one trick and you want to ban something that counters Cruel, like Sky or something. Or you have the off chance that you know that an enemy has a one trick on their team. This is something that I often do if I know that I'm playing up against someone who plays a specific hero very well but nothing else. For instance, if I'm playing Dowsy TV, I will ban Idris because I know that that is his best hero by far, and it will give me a greater odds of winning if I ban it. So, those are the considerations that you need to take into account when an A-side ban comes your way. Let's have a look at the B-side ban now. This is something that is also got a very similar parameters to an A-side ban, but only slightly differs. Again, you ban something that you don't want to play against or is strong in meta. For instance, a lot of B-side bans at the moment tend to be Grace, because if Baron is banned, then Grace generally becomes the next ban, because a lot of people don't want to play against Grace, and she's pretty easy first pick hero for A-side. And again, something that it comes into the second phase of this is banning something that you don't want your opponents to first pick. So for instance, if they ban something random, like an alpha, then you will want to ban whatever you don't want them to pick first. So if that's Baron, you ban Baron. If that's Grumpjaw, you ban Grumpjaw. Anything that is strong right now and is easily first picked by A-side, and you don't feel comfortable countering, then you have to ban it. So that's what the B-side ban comes into play. It's for getting rid of something that you would feel very unhappy A-side picking first. Again, the same instances apply to the A-side ban. If you have a specific hero that you think counters your composition that you want to run, then you can ban that, and you can leave up a strong pick if you think that you're pretty comfortable playing into that. And also, on the off chance that you know that there is a one trick on the enemy team, then sometimes banning the one trick's hero can give you a greater odds of success, because obviously limiting their hero pool from 1 to 0 is always good. There are some other banning tactics that you could consider as well. Now, you could ban something random to ensure a good, strong A-side pick, and that means you could say you're an A-side, you ban a Rhyme. Rhyme can be good into certain compositions, but generally Rhyme isn't that good. So you ban Rhyme, and then the B-side then have to ban one of the overpowered picks right now, and then you get an OP pick as your first pick on A-side. So it guarantees you something good on A-side, but you also have to open yourself up to the fact that B-side will also likely get a strong pick. Maybe not necessarily as strong as the one that you get, but it will be a trade-off that you're willing to make. You could counter a random ban on B-side with another random ban of your own, so that you leave up plenty of strong picks. For instance, right now, the three most popular bans you would wager on update 2.6 are Baron, Grumpjaw, and Grace. Let's say A-side bans Rhyme, you could just randomly ban Cruel, and then suddenly they first pick Baron, then you get Grace and Grumpjaw if that kind of composition works for you. Or as the meta evolves, there'll always be a cycle of very strong picks. So that could be a tactic. If they ban something random, you could ban something random on B-side, and then you get a first rotation on B-side of 2 strong picks, because no strong picks have been banned whatsoever. You could also intentionally leave open a strong pick on B side to try and counter it. So you could say, okay, I'm going to bait them into picking Baron, so I'll just ban something else, and then they pick Baron. And let's say you banned Arden, for instance, a good hero that goes with Baron, and then you pick a composition designed to counter Baron, and then that kind of shuts down that overpowered pick because you have picked a composition that counters it. So that's another tactic to think about when approaching the draft phase. And you should also think about what the enemy has banned as well. This is something that's really interesting. It happens quite a lot in various MOBAs. If the A side bans something out of the blue that is very odd, then you need to consider why they might have banned it. Now, they might have just banned something random, but let's say they banned Cruel, for instance. You could be thinking, why would they ban Cruel? Maybe they want to play Alpha, you know, or something like that. Maybe they want to play Rhyme, because Cruel traditionally does fall right into Rhyme. So then you basically then ban one of those, and you say, okay, I've shut down their pick that they wanted to pick, and it doesn't actually shut down the overpowered picks as well, because it's in essence another random ban. So it's a good way of thinking about the ban phase. If they ban something random, consider why they might have banned that, and then think about heroes that you could ban that they might be trying to pick. And this brings us nicely to the first pick on A side. Now, A side first pick is obviously the top priority comes when there is an OP hero open, you are comfortable playing that hero, you pick it. So number one rule of A side first pick, if there is an OP hero up, you are comfortable with playing that hero, or someone in your team is, you pick that hero. But let's move past that and look at some other instances. You can pick a captain hero here. This is the safe option. Picking a captain hero on first rotation is always very safe because it is the least likely area of your composition that will suffer from being counterpicked. If you pick your jungler or your laner first, there is always the option for your enemy to get a good second rotation with a counterpick. Now I want to be very clear here. Never, ever, 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 ever first pick your jungle on A side unless it's a ridiculously OP hero in the meta. Because jungle is one of those areas of the game where if you get countered, it can be the most devastating for your team. Now, obviously on A side, depending on how the draft goes, and B side if they hold their jungle pick to last, there is always the instance that you get countered in the jungle. But if you pick your jungle pick on A side first, they could counter you with captain and lane and in jungle. So they could completely shut down your jungler, which actually could be very harmful for your game plan. So always, always try to avoid picking the jungler on A side first rotation unless in the meta that you're playing in, a jungler is incredibly overpowered right now. Okay, moving on from that. Pick a strong laner that fits into multiple compositions. For instance, on update 2.6 and for many updates previous to this, it has been Vox. Vox is a pretty solid A-side first pick because he slots into a lot of good compositions. He has very few bad lane matchups, and even if he did, Iron Guard Contract and Book of Eulogies do make lane matchups a little easier on laners these days. Or you pick something that's integral to your composition, or something that you don't want B-side to get on first rotation. So you need to pick something that you are afraid that you don't want B-side to take away from you. For instance, if I am playing against DalCTV, I'm going to drop that name in again, I would sometimes pick Idris first on A-side because I can deny it from him. Same works if you just don't want anything on the B-side first rotation to get picked, and it's really important they don't get it, then you can pick a hero that you feel that you need to deny from your enemies. So when it comes to B-side first rotation, there are a lot of different ways to approach this. Now, obviously if there are remaining OP heroes up and you are comfortable with playing that hero, you can pick that on B-side first rotation as well. But what I really want to delve into here is the benefit of B-side. Now, A-side obviously has its benefits that you can get your first pick on an OP hero, but I think in Vainglory, the culture in draft is that countering is better than OP in a lot of ways, because Vainglory is a very counter-heavy game. There are so many counters to specific heroes that on B-side, you always have the advantage of having last pick. Now, I've talked about, in the current meta, jungle being the sort of optimum role to try and search for a counter pick in. This might change in metas going down the line. I want this video to have longevity, so if this becomes, over time, that lane becomes the more dominant area of the map, and that's where your counter pick should be, the benefit of B-side is to save that to last pick. So on B-side first rotation, I would always recommend locking in a captain, at least a captain, because you do not want to give away your entire benefit of your B-side draft. The benefit of your B-side draft is that you counter one of the carry roles with your last pick. So you want to pick a captain up, because like I said, captains, even if they get countered, it's usually not the worst thing in the world. So you want to pick a captain here, and I would always recommend usually picking a laner. Unless the enemy has first picked jungle, then you can just lock in your jungle counter pick right there and then. But I would always recommend locking in a laner, because laning with Book of Eulogies right now and Ironguard Contract is so forgiving anyway. So the problem with laning at this point in time is that because a lot of the meta is so jungle focused, you can actually get away with very poor lane matchups with Book of Eulogies and Ironguard Contract, just giving you the sustain necessary. I very, very rarely see people getting killed 1v1 in lane, especially at the Vainglorious rank. So I would always recommend on B side first rotation, locking a captain and a laner in, unless you really, really, really want a jungler that you don't want to give away to the enemy on their next rotation. For instance, I don't know, maybe you don't want to give the enemy Samuel because it would really round out their composition and the ability to siege turrets. So you're going to take Samuel away because they first picked weapon power Kestrel or something. So you take Samuel knowing that that would be really tough for you to deal with. But I would always usually recommend picking a laner and a captain here. And like I said, only if you feel that a certain jungler would really, really synergize with their first pick that you can take that there. Also, you want to pick something that try and counters the A-side first pick, that you don't want the A-side to lock in so that they remove all counters for their particularly OP or priority pick that they took on A-side first rotation. So, for instance, my friend Dalsey is an Idris one trick. I've talked about him a lot in this video. He says that he likes to pick Idris into Baron. So, you know, not that you'd see Idris in the jungle usually, but you would lock in Idris because you wouldn't want to give the enemy the option to pick Idris and take that away from you as a counter pick for the Baron. And also, finally, you want to pick things that are integral to your composition and that you don't want to give away. So, you know, for instance, if you really, really need a Lyra to make your composition work, you want to take that now so that the enemy doesn't have the option to pick Lyra on their next rotation. So, again, that's denying things from B-side rotation, things that are really, really integral to making your composition work, and framing it around counter-picking that first pick that the enemy picked up. Unless it's a captain, and then you just lock in two strong picks that you think that will do well regardless of what gets picked into them. And now we move on to the A-side second rotation. Now this is where you're going to round out your composition, so at this point, there's probably not many OP heroes left. It goes without saying, if something's made it this far throughout the draft and it's not locked in and it is OP on this current meta, you should probably pick it. But all in all, you should really pick to support your first pick. Let's say you've picked a Baron first pick, you need to pick a captain and a jungler that can play around Baron, because Baron is your win condition. He is a hero that kind of demands a composition to be built around him, so I would consider a Lyra captain, or an Arden captain, or a Finn captain, super defensive captains that I know can help peel for the Baron. I wouldn't go in and lock a Fortress, for instance, because Fortress doesn't really do much to protect a Baron, so therefore I would be picking to support my first pick. If the enemy has picked their jungler, for instance on B side first rotation, and you haven't, you could pick to counterpick at this point as well. So let's say they locked in their CP Blackfeather on B side first rotation, and you think it's a CP Blackfeather, or you have that indication that it could be. You could then lock in a Skye, for instance, knowing that you have a pretty good matchup there. And it goes for a lot of matchups. So if they lock in their jungler on that rotation, you could say, okay, I can lock in a counter jungler here. You get a counter pick on A side, which is sometimes quite rare to have. If they've locked in their laner and you are yet to lock in your laner, you could pick a laner that you think has a good time in the laning phase versus their laner, or has a good time in the late game. For instance, Idris pretty good into a lot of immobile ranged carries, so you could say, okay, I'm not going to do well in the laning phase, but I know that my laner will counter their laner eventually, so counter picks can exist on A side if the enemy has shown their pick that you have not already. If you've locked in a carry, a laner, and then they lock in a laner and a captain, you can't really counter pick anything because you've already locked in your laner, so there's no counter picks available apart from the captain role, which we know is slightly less valuable. It is valuable to counter pick captains, but slightly less valuable to counter pick than sort of counter picking in the jungle or the lane. If the enemy is yet to show their laner or the jungler, then you need to try and pick something that is strong in a lot of matchups, knowing that it's hard. You know, if they had to counterpick it, it would be something that would be awkward for them to counterpick into. For instance, if I had to pick my jungle pick on A side last rotation and they haven't shown their jungle yet, I would lock in something like a Samuel, knowing that Samuel on update 2.6 is very strong in the jungle and has very few bad matchups. They would then have to lock in something like a Taka, for instance, which could be awkward for their composition. So if you have to pick blind in the jungle or the lane, try and pick something that has few bad matchups and is generally quite strong, and it would be awkward to counterpick it. And finally, something that's really important to note is you've got to think about what your team composition is doing. So if you pick a Baron, you already know that you're going to be playing for the late game, because Baron doesn't really have an early game. You're going to be playing to the point where Baron gets 4 items. So you need to pick a composition that is designed around that. A captain that will scale and protect Baron as the game goes on, and either an early game jungler to help Baron survive, or you go all in on the late game and just say, okay, farm up and then we become unstoppable in the late game. I often prefer picking a good early mid-game jungler with Baron because I'll always have something to pressure when Baron is really struggling in the early game, but some people do like to go full late game, so there's always that option there. So you also think about what your composition is doing. Are you a team fight composition? Are you a objective focused composition? Are you going to pick something that is focusing on taking turrets, sieging turrets, taking gold mine? Or are you going to be looking to team fight over and over again? When it gets to that, you can engage team fights and just win them. So you've got to think about what your composition is doing, and that comes from experience playing the heroes. Just in your mind, when you've seen your first pick, you say, okay, that gives me some indication about what we want to be doing. If it's a captain first pick, the composition is yours to decide from here. You can make your composition, so that's what you discuss with your teammates. So it's all about thinking about what you want to achieve with your composition on A side last rotation, like giving you a strong win condition. You know, like we talked about late game, early game, objective focused, all that kind of thing. So that is A side last rotation. So the first thing to do on B side last pick, it's a little bit more simple now because we've reached the end of the draft and you only have 1 pick left to do. B side last pick should be playing to the strengths of B side, which is having the ability to counter pick in the lane or the jungle. Traditionally, it tends to be the jungle. So that's really your first priority. If that's the way the draft has gone for you, and hopefully it will have done, you should have got a jungle counter pick as your final pick on B side. Or lane pick, depending on the meta. Remember, this is going to evolve as the meta evolves. So whatever is strong right now, whatever people are looking to counter pick more often than not, B side should be the last pick that allows you to do that, depending on what the meta is. You should pick something that fits your composition as well. If you can't get a counter pick and that counter pick doesn't fit your composition anyway, you should fit something to fit your composition. So you know again, we talked about it with A side last rotation. You're looking to play towards your win conditions. What are your win conditions? How will your last pick help you achieve that? For instance, you've got I don't know, let's say for instance you've got an Arden and a Vox. That's a really malleable composition, but you know that you've got the ability to gauntlet, so Arden's going to be able to like lock people down. You know that you've got a very good kiting composition, so you're going to want something that can help help Vox kite, or kite itself, like a Sky for instance. So you've got to do a lot of thinking about what fits your composition, and I will do a video on talking about compositions and how to read them and what you should be looking to do with them at some point in the near future, hopefully in the next week or 2. But pick to fit your composition. So if you know what your composition is designed to do, pick something that will help that. If you can't counter pick, and you can't pick something that your teammates are suggesting to play, pick something that you're comfortable on and you know that you can perform well on, at the very last. And that should go for all of draft as well. If you're worried about what to pick, you can't pick what your teammates are suggesting, just pick something that you're comfortable on. And again, like I said, play to your win conditions. Pick something that fits your win conditions based on what's been picked so far. And that concludes draft. That is my guide to drafting, from bans to last picks, all of the information that I hope you should need to know, and I hope it's been useful for all of you. Obviously this is going to evolve as the meta evolves, picks will become strong and less strong. This is something that you should always refer back to and try and read the meta and use this as a guide to help you draft well in team games and in solo queue. Thanks guys, I'll see you soon.